Evolution, Revolution. A discussion on the changing shape of us. This podcast series has grown out of some articles I've written, which you can find in the show notes. Lifeline Church is undergoing a transition. This is a critical stage for those who have grown up in Lifeline or joined along the journey to bring their unique contribution to the table, because those that have led for the last 40 years won't be leading for the next 40. As we continue the journey, we need to know what we need to carry with us, what can be left behind, and what needs to be developed. I hope this podcast, along with my articles, might provoke and inspire you to offer what you carry.
Okay, fantastic. So I am here. I have announced. My name is Nick and I am here. I am here with Jamie. So hello, Jamie.
Hello.
Yes, and we are here for the next installment of this podcast series where we're looking through some articles that you've been written. Wow. Some articles that you've been writing. And today we're looking at an article that you've written about friendship. So let's get straight in. What would you say the difference is between worldly friendship and biblical friendship?
There's probably a number of differences, but there's a couple that I pick up in the article that I was writing, which is really around reciprocation and compatibility. And so there's kind of an attitude within our cultural understanding of friendship that we need to be compatible. We need to have similar likes. We need to be from similar neighborhoods. If you're like me, you're like me. And what we see in the Bible is idea that we don't have to be like each other. If you look at the early church, they were people from all different backgrounds, different countries, a real variety of people that were coming together but yet finding actual friendship. And another thing is the reciprocation. So I'll give to you if you give back to me. And the mentality behind that is this kind of almost friendship built on an assumed lack. That if I give of what I've got to you, I'm depleted if you don't reciprocate, give back to me. But what we see in the Bible is the idea of a generous God who is our supply and our source. That means that I can give generously of myself. I don't need you to replenish me because God replenishes me. So therefore, anything that I'm asking of you is for your good, not for my need.
Okay, cool. That's really helpful. So you quote a biblical scholar called D.A. Carson in your article, and he makes the point that the New Testament is full of commands and encouragements to love one another. And the reason for that is because the church actually isn't made up of people who would be natural friends, rather, if anything, natural enemies. What does he mean by that, and how do we see this idea of natural enemies showing themselves as friends in the New Testament?
Yeah, when you look at who was in Jesus' crew, his disciples, you've got Simon the Zealot. So the Zealots were the radicals. They were the freedom fighters that would live up in the mountains north of the Sea of Galilee, and they would pop down and attack Roman soldiers, the occupiers, whenever they could do. It's kind of guerrilla warfare, insurgency. So you had Simon the Zealot as one of Jesus' followers, and then you also had Matthew the tax collector as one of Jesus' followers. Now, the tax collectors were Jews that were recruited by the Roman occupiers, and their role was to extract the tax out of the occupied people, which was, the tax was fairly crippling, and to actually have to give that to a conquering force is really rubbing your nose in it. So the collaborator of Matthew and the freedom fighter of Simon, they would never have been friends. They would never have rubbed shoulders. The only thing that brought them together was the fact that Jesus was in the center of the crew. Now, you see this continue even after Jesus has left the earth, where if you look at the first church in Philippi, so when you follow the story in Acts, you see the first person that Paul meets is a woman called Lydia. She's kind of well-to-do. She's a seller of purple, which would have meant that she was quite a successful business lady. The next person we see is this demonized slave girl who Paul cast out the demon. And then the jailer who was actually keeping watch over Paul while he was in prison. So at the end of his time in Philippi, Paul says Paul gathered those together. It's like, where would you find those three people together? The gospel does something to become a commonality between people that have nothing else, and it actually becomes the most important commonality.
Okay. I'd love to be known as like Simon the Zealot. What a nickname. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Sounds like it could be a wrestler. So in the book of Acts, I think in Acts 2 and Acts 4, maybe in other places as well, there's this phrase of the believers, the early church, having everything in common, which just sounds magnificent. Mm-hmm. What do you think that meant? And we're talking, at that point, we're talking about a few thousand people, I think, right? 3,000 people having everything in common. Yeah. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to imagine what that would be like. I mean, the passages refer to possessions and the idea of not having possessions in common. And it wasn't that no one, it wasn't like a communist thing of no one owns anything, it's all owned by some higher authority. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. So people still had possessions, but they didn't consider them their own. And so it was almost like God has the right to anything and can direct it in any direction at any point. I remember a story from Joyce Meyer. She talked about once praying for a woman and said, God, what can I do for this woman? And she looks up, and hanging in her wardrobe is this red dress. And she thought, that's a strange thought, pushes out of her mind. Then later on, I was praying for the same woman, and the image of the red dress came back up again. And she thought, but I've not even had a chance to wear that dress. And then it dawned on her, it wasn't for you. That red dress was never yours. You had it in order to be able to give it. And that's such a radical way of thinking about the things that we have, that I'm looking after us, I'm stewarding it, but I might be a channel where the things just pass straight through me without me touching it. And to live like that, there was a band when I was growing up called Papa Roach. They had a line, if you're something along the lines of your possessions possess you, and we can live like that. And there's a kind of an orphan mentality that makes us think that there's no one that's out there for us, so we have to hoard and manipulate and beg, borrow, steal and keep for ourselves, otherwise we will be in want. But if we know him as our source, then, and he is a good father who is our provider and our protector, means that we can be absolutely generous because we know who's providing for us. And so when you think of everything in common, that's kind of on the possessions way of things. But I think it talked about them being in one mind, like 3,000 people. And if you think these were the Jews that had come for Passover, that had stuck around all together. And the Jews were spread, the diaspora were around all of the Roman Empire and all over the place from years of exiles and whatnot. So they have different language, have different culture. They had some kind of Jewish traditions that in common, but here they were. Like, if you think when Peter spoke, everyone heard him speak in their own language. So they were coming with different languages, but yet at this point, a few months on from that, they have everything in common. They're all of one mind. That's a miraculous work of God. I don't have a reference point in my life for the people that I'm with to have everything in common. But wouldn't it be amazing if we did? And I think that's on offer. I've not seen it yet.
So the word fellowship is such a Christian word, you don't use it anywhere else. I just think of my granny, bless her, so talking about having fellowship with her friends, and I just imagine like cold sandwiches and tea and maybe, I don't know. But what do you think is meant by this word? It's translated from the Greek word koinonia, which sounds like a much more interesting word, but maybe it's just because it's Greek, what do you think is meant by this the word fellowship?
I mean, that word koinonia, if I pronounce it right, I'm not an expert on any of these things, but it talks about participation. It talks about a share in something, and a joint contribution. So you can have shares in a company that you've got a sense of ownership of it. You've got a piece of the puzzle. And so the idea of coming together in fellowship is not just a social interaction, but I belong or this, I'm helping hold something up here. So there was something that caused these guys to come together, which just it was so difficult to understand, but there was a deep connection between them that caused them to act very different to the culture around them.
Cool. So kind of following on from that, what you're talking about, could you talk to me about Paul and the Macedonians' generosity towards him? What's the story there?
So one of the impressive things that Paul did during his ministry was, on hearing about a prophecy about the coming famine that was going to be experienced in Judea, he saw this was a good opportunity to unify the church. So you had the Jewish Christians in Judea, Jerusalem, and then you had really what Paul was doing, which is the ministry to the Greeks, to the Gentiles. And so there was always going to be a slight difference between how the church grew, but he was determined to make sure this didn't become a split between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, but there would be one church, one body of Christ. And so he thought, well, what an opportunity for the Greeks to invest back into where the church started by raising a fund to support those in famine. And so all the churches that he was planting, he was saying, look, guys, you got an opportunity to support the people back in Judea and support the mission that I'm on. And Paul was absolutely gobsmacked about what the Macedonians were able to do. And he said, so it's out of their extreme poverty, they were able to give. It says they were able to give. They gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely of their own. They urgently plead with us for the privilege of sharing, and that word sharing is that word koinonia, fellowship, the privilege of fellowship in this service to the Lord's people. So Paul is gobsmacked. Like, how have they managed to raise this money? I've seen the poverty that they're in. But they were saying, let us be part of this. We've got a share in this. We've got an ownership of it. We want the privilege to be part of this expression. We want to play our part in it. Effectively, don't leave us out because we're poor. And that's a really tough thing at times, of letting people give what it doesn't look like they've got, but realizing that when God does something in us, he puts something in us that makes us want to participate, give of what we can do. And he just saw a grace and a God-given ability amongst the Macedonians to give, and they gave so cheerfully as well.
So this true fellowship, this sharing, this koinonia, what is it that would cause people to live this way? It feels like an incredibly high standard for us to meet. So how can I be like this person?
I don't think we can. I think it's a miracle of what God does in us when we come into relationship with him, when we recognize Jesus Lord. We are empowered by his Spirit. It's all, if you think of an illustration of dropping Mentos into a bottle of Coke, you see the reaction shoots the fizz out of the bottle, and we can't produce that out of ourselves. God drops something into us, his grace into us, that causes this to come out of us. And it's looking for the Spirit to do what only the Spirit can do. It's not about me trying harder, but by the miraculous work of God, learning to collaborate with that compulsion.
So you tell a story in your article from Jerry Cook, the author of the book Love, Acceptance and Forgiveness. If possible, could you share that story with us, or the highlights?
It's a great book, and this particular bit, Jerry Cook's explaining that for everyone that's new into the church, he almost has like a repeated phrase that he takes people through. So it's here, look them in the eyes and say, brother, I want you to know that I'm committed to you. You'll never knowingly suffer at my hands. I'll never say or do anything knowingly to hurt you. I'll always, in every circumstance, seek to help and support you. If you're down and I can lift you up, I'll do that. Anything I have that you need, I'll share with you, and if need be, I'll give to you. No matter what I find out about you, and no matter what happens in the future, either good or bad, my commitment to you will never change. And there's nothing you can do about it. You don't have to respond. I love you, and that's what it means. Now, one day, someone from his church came up to him and said, do you remember that promise that you made me, and was able to repeat it word for word? Well, I've got a confession to make. And he proceeds to tell Cook of the most dreadful things that he's done. And Cook is listening to this whilst remembering the promise that he's made. And he's angry. The guy's absolutely damaged his witness. And then it dawns on him, when this guy stops talking, I'm going to have to respond to him. And the reality hit him. I don't think I can live up to the promise that I've made. I don't think I can treat him the same anymore. I don't think I can love him now. And it was at that point of desperation that the Holy Spirit met with Jerry Cook, and it was like the Mentos being dropped on the inside. Suddenly, a compassion for this guy just welled up from within him. And when the guy stopped talking, he said, man, you have left no stone unturned. There's nothing more that you could have said that would make me any more want to despise you. But let me tell you this, because God loves you and he's put his love inside me for you, I can embrace you as a brother and affirm my commitment to you. Obviously, the guy just broke down and wept because he heard the love of God coming through Jerry at that time.
Wow, what a powerful story. So, if I want to be a friend to people as God would have me to be, what would I expect to see or, think or feel within myself?
I mean, love has to be expressed. It has to find actions. So, the idea of serving someone, particularly serving in needs, being close enough to someone, knowing what their needs are, being able to predict pressure points that person's going to be facing, and be able to express love in relevant ways. Being willing to give of yourself, let someone into your life as well as being willing to go into theirs. Being honest and upfront, not saying things about people behind their backs, but bringing it to them. Giving people time. Having fun together. Bringing a sense of encouragement to someone. Speaking about not just who they are today, but who you believe God's called them to be. Remembering things that someone's facing and so people's going through. Bible talks about weeping with those that are weeping, rejoice with those that are rejoicing. Sometimes you go from one conversation where you've wept to another conversation with someone else where you're rejoicing, and being able to, by the grace of God, flow and be relevant to those people at that time. Considering your success, my success, and your failure, my failure. It's really a giving of yourself that is empowered by the Spirit.
Yeah, it's really good hearing those things that you're just talking about, particularly after, just going through that thing of, I can't do this, that's not a standard that I can will myself to meet, but thank God that he can place that in me. Okay, my final question. So in our world today, we're living in a particularly individualistic society, where everything is set up perfectly for us to operate just as fine as we could as individuals, and what you're talking about is really going against that culture, that real costly genuine friendship, and it's going against that culture by putting such an emphasis on friendship. Could a situation develop, however, of us ending up idolizing this idea of friendship?
Yeah, I think of friendship as having a purpose, and somewhat a contradiction, but I think friendship is indispensable, and also friendship is dispensable. And so when I'm talking about friendship being indispensable, I'm talking about the fact that God expresses himself in Father, Son, and Spirit. He's in community, he's in friendship, and then we are created in his image, so we would expect to be able to show him in the way that we relate. And if you think, Jesus said that the world will know you are my disciples if you love each other. So we have to have people to express love to. You've got to have friendships in that way. And when you're in such an individualistic Western society where you've got your iPads and your iPhone and your iPods, I mean, you don't even have, when I was a kid, you'd have an argument over what you watched in the living room on TV. Now, no one argues anymore because everyone's watching on their phones in their separate rooms, and there's not a platform to even have to work things through together. And so then the idea of actually being put in a situation where you're with people that you disagree with or you find annoying or obnoxious, it's actually really hard work. And you can't just purge all your Facebook contacts to make sure that you've only got people that agree with you. When God calls us to be in communion, in unity, and I find that there's a tax collector amongst us, that's a real demand on me, which I can't fulfill, but by the grace of God I can do. And so friendship is actually critical, because iron sharpens iron. We're never designed to be an island. And C.S. Lewis, in his book on the Four Loves, has a fantastic chapter on friendship, and he describes the necessity of community to really discover anyone. So there's a bit here that he says, "In each of my friends there's something that only some other friend can fully bring out. By myself I am not large enough to call the whole man into activity. I want other lights than my own to show all of his facets." And he's talking about so there was three friends. One of them was Charles, one of them was Ronald, and the other one was C.S. Lewis. But Charles died. He said, "Now that Charles is dead, I shall never again see Ronald's reaction to a specifically Caroline joke. Far from having more of Ronald, having him to myself now that Charles is away, I have less of Ronald. We possess each friend not less, but more, as the number of those with whom we share him increases." Now, so he's saying we need multiple people to draw out one person's personality. How much more so do you need that to discover who God is? I need your experiences of God. I need someone else's revelation. I can't get a full grasp of who he is without sharing that with you. And if my desire to discover God, I've got to be in friendships and community for that. But it's friendship for a purpose. So at some points we got to recognize that some friendships don't serve that purpose, and therefore they are dispensable. C.S. Lewis again talks about the idea of friendship. You first hear friendship when one person says, "What? You two? I thought I was the only one." The very condition of friendship is that we have something more than just friendship. And so we've got to connect around a subject. If I just want friendship for friendship's sake, there's nothing for the friendship to be about. So I kind of see it almost like biblical friendship happens when we're both on a viewing platform, looking at something more incredible than ourselves. And it's almost like I'm there witnessing something incredible, you're there witnessing something incredible, and almost I blurt out loud, "Wow, this is incredible." And you say, "Wow, can you see it too?" Our witnessing of who God is becomes the subject around which our friendship is formed. Our friendship is about something more than just us. And so when that isn't the central basis, the Bible does talk about how can two people walk together unless they agree. If God's of no interest to you and discovering God of no interest to you, it will reduce the possibility for the depth of friendship. And at times, we've got to come back to, if Christ is the prize that we're going after, sometimes other things that are good things, they can't become the ultimate thing if Christ is the ultimate thing. So Jesus talks about, is not life more than, and he was talking about food, or he's talking about clothes. But you can say the same thing, is not life more than a nice career, a good house, 2.4 kids, nice comfortable friendships? Yeah, life is more than all those things. It's about the prize, about seeing him, living in him. But when you discover others that want the same thing, my goodness, what friendship we can truly have together, what adventure we can go on together, what koinonia we can have together. And so we're on a journey, and you can have a fellow traveler if you're going on the same journey.
Amazing. All right, cool. Well, we will bring this episode to a close there. Thank you very much, and we'll be back soon. Thanks for listening to this 8-episode podcast exploring how to make a healthy transition to the next generation as a church whose heart is set on pilgrimage. We invite you to listen to the full series, but also to get in touch if you have questions, so that iron can sharpen iron as we bring our collective wisdom together. Our contact details can be found in the show notes. For further teaching, do tap into the Lifeline Church Sunday Teaching Podcast and watch out for our conversational podcast on questions arising from the Book of Kings, due to be released in July 2023.